It's an interesting cultural phenomenon, and it's never mentioned in this play, which is really interesting. So there's that. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you about was, do you remember who the actors are that performed Greek plays?
Apollo knows it.
This is similar to in Shakespeare.
Yeah. It's all males.
All males, yeah. And so not only do you have, kind of mentioning, linking back to Eli's presentation, not only do you have like women kind of objectifying each other and checking out each other's breasts and pubic hair and rear ends, but the part of the joke is that like they're not real women, right? And so like you have women examining each other's like feminine attributes, and like the idea is like the joke is that they're fake. So you have like men dressing up women and dressed up as women, and supposedly like the amazing, most bestest, most beautiful women around. So that's part of the joke. Also, do you know who the audience probably would have been?
Probably all males.
Probably all males. Yep, that's what we think. So it's a performance of males given to an audience of males. And also plays during this time were kind of like a national event. Do you remember me talking about this? Like that, like pretty much all the male citizens of the whole like city state, so Athens, all of like pretty much all of the adult males of Athens would go and watch these things during this big like yearly festival that lasted for like a week. And so like it's kind of like, I mean, if you didn't have money to attend this thing, the state would pay for your admission. So it was like a kind of a nation building thing. And so this makes also what Aristophanes was doing when he was kind of criticizing Athenians and the Athenian state even more radical and even more, I don't know, essential and important and brave. So those are kind of like a real quick kind of historical underpinning. So Aristophanes was the most famous comedian, and then the most famous tragedians were Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles. So that's good. So there's some kind of historical stuff. The other thing that I kind of thought was really interesting, I mean, so we read Macbeth, right? And there's very little comedy in Macbeth. Was anyone able to watch the recording that I kind of posted on in the announcements? There's a live performance of Macbeth. It's very good, and it's actually really funny. So if you have some time, I don't know what your quarantine situation looks like, but if you have some time and curiosity, you could watch that and like look at like the comedy of Macbeth and kind of compare it and contrast it to the comedy of Lysistrata. There's one funny scene in Macbeth, and that's the porter scene. Does anyone remember this? Here, why don't I show you a little clip? How about that? Yeah? And then we can kind of compare and contrast like the comedy of Shakespeare with some of the kinds of comedy from Aristophanes. Because the idea is like, oftentimes comedy doesn't translate very well. And that's why we didn't talk about the porter scene, and I don't remember the porter scene. Or you don't remember the Macbeth. Because it's like, it doesn't seem to fit. And it's like a lot of it doesn't really translate. Let's see. There we go. So in this performance of Macbeth, where am I? Okay. In this performance of Macbeth, they actually changed the porter scene kind of a lot. They gave a little bit of leeway to the porter because they say that, all right, I'm sharing. Can you guys see it? See where we're at? So at this point in the play, Macbeth has just killed Duncan, so he's committed his first murder. And so, you still with me? Good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. So at this point, Macbeth has just killed Duncan. And he's covered in blood, and Lady Macbeth is covered in blood, and they hear a knocking at the door.
Lest occasion call us and show us to be watchers.
Can you hear it?
Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts.
To know my deed.
Yeah, it's just a bit laggy.
Is it a bit laggy? Or is it okay? It's a bit laggy. All right, so it's about 36 minutes in. I'm gonna keep going, but if it's really bad, just let me know, okay?
Okay, with thy knocking. I would not trust. Quiet. Whew. Here's a knocking indeed. If the man were porter of Hellgate, he'd have lots of turning the key. Who's there? The name of Beelzebub. Well, here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. Welcome to hell, farmer. Come on in. You have hankies enough about you? Hankies to mop your brow. You may borrow mine, sir. Where did I put that? It's pretty warm down here. You might need that. I'll let her get fell down for this. Try that. Yeah, it's very absorbent. You gotta mop your brows. Suit yourself! Here you will sweat. Who's there? The name. And the other devil's name. Oh, here's it. Here's it. What are you? You don't know? Sometimes this, sometimes that. Faith, here's an equivocator that can swear in both the scales against either scale, but could not equivocate his way into heaven. Welcome hither. You need a hanky? No? Well, come on in, equivocator. Habla inglés. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Lucy.
Lucy who?
Lucy Fur. Pleased to meet you. I hope you guess my name.
Okay. What do you think? This is very not Macbeth, or at least not the Macbeth that I was thinking of when I was reading it, right? So the joke in Macbeth is that this guy is he's porter, which means he lets people in, and like it's almost like Macbeth's house is the same as hell. It's not a joke that translates very well. Like, I mean, it doesn't seem. He does a great job, this performer, but people don't know what to do with this joke. Unlike in Lysistrata, right? Those jokes translate great. And I'm thinking particularly of the very first joke. So if you go to Lysistrata, Lysistrata says, if they called a Bacchic celebration or some festival for Pan or Coleus or for Gentiles, you'd not be able to move around through all the kettle drums. But there are no women here right now. Here's my neighbor. at least she's come. Hello, Kalanice. And Kalanice says, hello, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. She says, my dear Lysistrata, this is on like the first page, like page 4 in the reading that I gave you. My dear Lysistrata, why have you asked the women to meet here? What's going on? Is it something big? And Lysistrata says, it's huge. And Kalanice says, and hard as well. And Lysistrata says, yes, by God, really hard. And Kalanice says, well, then of course everyone should be here. And Lysistrata says, I didn't mean it like that. Like, stop. Like, so Kalanice and like everyone else in the play kind of acts like middle school boys. Would you say so? Yeah. And somehow that humor is more universal than something we see in perhaps Shakespeare. I mean, I'm not saying Shakespeare doesn't have his fair share of dick jokes, but this, like, it's nothing compared to Lysistrata. Okay, so there's that. Let me see, what else was I gonna talk to you guys about? So Patty had said before that this is a kind of like and Elia had said like Aristophanes is kind of an equal opportunity offender. But it's interesting because it shows that women have sexual needs and sexual desires, and in that way it's sort of a little bit empowered. Would you say that Aristophanes in this play is kind of a feminist? Could always say, in what ways is he, and in what ways is he maybe not so much a feminist?
Well, like, he's a feminist in the way that he wants women to be empowered. I just don't know that the way he goes about it is necessarily empowering.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think feminists want to be brought out in the light that are sexual objects and they know how much power their pussies have.
Right.
I don't think feminists would want that.
Well, I mean, feminists are all about like taking back the power of sexuality, but like they wouldn't want to be objectified, which is exactly what you're right about. Because like feminists wrote like The Joy of Sex in the 70s and Our Bodies Ourselves, so they're all about kind of reclaiming the female body for women's pleasure. So there's like, it's very kind of, it's really interesting because Aristophanes totally buys into this whole idea that like men and women are complete opposites, completely different, right? And like he has like basically all the worst stereotypes of men and women, right? So women, at the very beginning at least, women are late and they're kind of lazy, and you know they're all talk and no action, right? And you know they're only good at domestic stuff and stuff like this. And so in a lot of ways, like initially at least, women are just horrible stereotypes of themselves, right? But then of course you get all the men, and the men are also pretty bad stereotypes. And like do you remember that like what the old man chorus was going to do in the Acropolis or the Citadel? Do you remember what they were going to try to do?
They were going to try and burn it down with all the women inside.
Yes. And so what do you think of this? So this is so Lysistrata's plan has two parts, right? The first part is no sex for the men until there's peace. But what's the second part? What is the Acropolis important? In some versions it's called the Citadel. Do you remember?
I actually don't remember the second part.
The second part is that she and her women take over the Acropolis, and that's like where the treasury is.
Yeah, that's right. That's where all the money is. Yeah, I talked about that.
Yep, and so the women not only withhold their own sexual favors, but they also take all the money and refuse to share the money with the men. And so like the men, by going and like trying to burn it down, what do you think of that? So that not only are they like trying to like burn the women out, but what else?
The money too.
Like, is that smart?
It was
No.
kind of like contradictory because they were telling the women, they were like, if you take all the money, like, then we won't be able to like spend it on war, but then they were gonna burn it down anyways, so.
Yeah. Then I feel like they were kind of taking like a lot from women, so that was kind of like, okay, like we can burn this, but like we're still gonna have control over you.
Yeah, like it's like men are like power hungry in a way that like is like so destructive that it's like the destruction almost turns back on themselves. And it's comical because the men are all smoke, right? They're just blowing smoke. They can't get the fire lit, it's too smoky, and they keep choking themselves on the smoke. And so that part is really funny, especially because they're old men, especially if you think about fire as a metaphor for sexual desire or sexual prowess. And you can see this even now, like you know, you have burning lusts or a burning desire, or like you're inflamed by passion. Like thinking about these things, like oftentimes like sexual desire is linked to fire, but the old men can't get the fire started. All they're doing is blowing smoke. And so this is a sex joke, but it's also like a kind of window into men and their desire to control things and how destructive that control can be. And there's also this like there's this phrase, you know, fight fire with fire. But how do the women in Lysistrata fight fire, or the old men's fire?
The jugs of water.
So
I
they
think they pour water on it from the river.
yeah. So they all bring in drugs and they throw water on them. Again, this is a sex joke because, you know, if men are all fire and women are all, you know, when women get turned on, you know, yeah, get it? So again, it's a sex joke. But yeah, but it's also like the women are refusing to fight fire with fire, or if fire is considered like consuming and transformative and destructive, so like you think of a forest fire, right, and it can just consumes everything and it destroys everything, but then you need the water to come, right? And so what is water symbolic of? It's like renewal, right? Or rebirth, rejuvenation, you know, quenching of thirst. Like it's like nurturing, right? Fire destroys, water resurrects. You can think about like when a pregnant woman's water breaks, right? So it's all about like giving birth and stuff. So like Aristophanes is really buying into the whole men equal fire, women equal water. They're completely opposite. But then he's also kind of using these kinds of stereotypes to make some really interesting kind of comments on the destructive nature of war, and sometimes how that war gets out of control and becomes counterproductive, and destroys not just enemies, but also like yourself, and how sometimes that war needs to be quenched with a kind of like water symbol. Make sense? Clever? It's like working on like 3 levels. It's like straight up comedy because it looks like the men have peed themselves, and then it's also sex jokes, but then it's also symbolic of war. So, you know, very, very clever. You can kind of see why Aristophanes was so famous and why this is his most famous work, and you can kind of see why it survives and why it's been adapted so much. Let's see. If we go back to, all right, so when the women swear to carry out Lysistrata's plan, what did they swear on? You remember this?
Wasn't it a bowl and wine?
Yes. So initially, Lysistrata's like, all right, if you want to do this thing with me, let's swear on a shield. And the women are like, why would we swear on a shield? We don't care about shields. We don't use shields. No, you know, no. And then they talk about swearing on something else, and I can't remember what that second thing is. Let me check real quick.
There's a white horse.
Oh, a white horse. Oh, good.
The guts of a white horse.
The guts of a white horse.
Weird.
Right. So initially they were going to swear on a shield, and then they were going to sacrifice an animal, and they reject both of those. And what do you think is the significance of that?
Those were like 2 things that were like supposed to be for men, like men fight in wars and men do the like gory work with animals, stuff like that.
Yeah. So like again, like it's like the destructive nature of like men is linked to war. This even goes back to like last class when we talked about Hemingway and O'Brien, right? And how like war and masculinity are linked. And in order to be like a good man, like you kind of do war, but it separates you from women. Aristophanes is kind of actually like kind of trying to debunk that kind of thinking. And so instead of violently gutting a white horse and swearing on a shield, the women get a bowl or a jug or like a goblet. And then in it, they pour wine, right? And so what do you think is the symbolism of that?
Well, they said like in their chant, it was like basically if we have any sex, we can't drink wine anymore.
Yeah. So
That
funny.
was, yeah, they were trying to say like, it was something like, if I break my vow, I will only drink water. If I, remain faithful, I will drink wine.
And so the idea is also like that, like rather like it's almost like rewards keep you more honest than punishments, right?
And I
So-
think it was also like if they were seen drinking water instead of wine, it would have been like shameful, like, oh, you gave up essentially.
and also maybe even dangerous, because back in those times water it's full of all kinds of nasties, right? Not purified. And so that's reason why wine and beer is so kind of ubiquitous in a lot of these old plays, is because actually it was much safer to drink some kind of watered alcohol, because the alcohol would kill all the parasites and the micro organisms and stuff like that might make you really sick. So they say, oh, well, we'll only drink water, we won't drink wine. But also like I like the idea that instead of like destroying something, they like all get a little drunk. Right? Again, this is kind of like, instead of doing the warfare thing, maybe we should all just have some beers and chill, right?
So when are we doing that in class?
In our separate rooms, right? In our little separate houses. We can't even get beer. So I also would say that as this play kind of develops, Lysistrata gets more and more power. The women, like especially when like Elia talked about how the men are kind of ineffective. They're like no good at like what are they gonna say, fighting, they're kind of pussies, like Elia said, and they like running around shitting themselves, like a lot of bathroom humor. It almost like makes it seem like the women are in the right, so the women have the kind of ethical or moral high ground, and maybe also even the kind of blessings of the gods, because the women are empowered in this kind of extreme way and the men are so ineffective. The magistrate shows up and he says all these horrible things to Lysistrata, like, go home. Let's see, this is where I wanted to go next. Yeah. So what is the magistrate like? How does he treat Lysistrata? You guys remember? What is that magistrate like? Or I think he's called something different in different versions, something that begins with a C, or
He's a douche.
Yeah, he is a douche. Let's see. So this is around lines 27. So the magistrate shows up and he says, has not our women's lewdness shown himself in how they beat their drums for Sabazius, the god of excess, or on their rooftops shed tears for Adonis? That's what I heard one time in our assembly. Demostrates, what a stupid man he is, was arguing that we should sail to Sicily. Meanwhile, his wife was dancing around and screaming out, alas, Adonis. While Demostrates talked, saying we should levy soldiers for Zacynthius, the women on the rooftop getting drunk and yelling out, weep for Adonis, weep. But he kept on forcing his opinion through, that mad, brutal ox, whom the gods despise. That's just kind of loose, degenerate stuff that comes from women. Okay, so what is his view of women? What do you think?
That they think that they're better than men.
Maybe. I was thinking like, okay, so men are arguing about serious matters like war and whether they should make war and stuff like that, whereas women are just distracting, right? They're getting drunk and they're partying and they're doing shallow things like worrying about like a heartthrob or something, right? Make sense? Yeah. But this is also kind of Aristophanes kind of poking fun at the men too, because like as this guy is like participating and reasoning that they should go to war and the women are kind of distracting and like getting drunk and partying and like worrying about like this hottie, this guy manages to ignore them and push his, agenda through, and they go to the war and it's a disaster, right? And so if they had just like been distracted by the women, listened to the women, partied with the women maybe, this whole disastrous war and would have been avoided. They would have avoided losing money. They would have avoided losing lives. And so like the magistrate kind of almost like proves his own point, but like he's too misogynist to see it, right? And then the next speech of his, or paragraph, I guess, is like one of the most famous because he's trying to like say how shallow and awful women are and how like base, and he's trying to like be like, I know best, but like the women keep making fun of him because he keeps accidentally making sexual puns, right? And so the women keep undercutting his authority because he can't even talk in a way that doesn't bring up sexual puns. And this is where he says like, he says like, we men are to blame because we teach our wives to be lazy and spoiled, here's what we tell some working jeweler goldsmith about that necklace I brought here. Last night my wife was dancing and the bolt slipped from its hole. I have to take a boat to Salamis. If you got time, you could visit her with that tool of yours and fix the way the bolt sits in her hole. And it's like ridiculous. Like that is like, it's really funny to me even now. And then he talks about a cobbler, right? Another man goes to the shoemaker, a strapping lad with an enormous prick, and says, "Oh, shoemaker, a sandal strap is pinching my wife's tender little toe. Could you come at noon and rub her strap and stretch it really wide?" And so like, he's trying to say like, we spoil our wives, and like, he's actually like, they're just making fun of him. So he's not very smart, and he definitely can't hold a candle to Lysistrata. So Lysistrata comes out and he says like, let's see, stomp them, stretch their eyeballs, all that good stuff. And then the magistrate says like, look, like we need our money back. And she says like, no, you don't. Like, in fact, women control the household purse, and you guys have mismanaged the state's purse, so we're going to take over, and we're going to manage it much better than you have. And he says, no, war is the cause of men. And Lysistrata says, then good luck making war, because you're not getting any more money to do it. If you go to page... She says, we're going to rescue you. If you go to page 35, is that? She's got this extended metaphor. Oh, she also says, like, it's, like, really annoying because men are running around all dressed up for war just to, like, buy figs and stuff. And that seems ridiculous. Oh, I meant to tell you, I feel like I told you guys this before, but do you remember in ancient Greece, was it Greek or Latin? I can't remember if it was Greek or Latin, but like the word for penis is the same as the word for sword. And the word for vagina is the same as the word for sheath. Right? So Aristophanes is kind of making puns about this as well, like all the stuff about how Lysistrata says, like, men run around in the marketplace with their spears up. Can you picture what she might be saying, or what that might kind of resonate with the like audience? Is like men are running around with their penises in like inappropriate times. Let's see. Mm. So this is on like the last page, 39. Well, actually, it starts on 38. Anyone want to be the magistrate and be Lysistrata? The magistrate basically says, like, how are you going to end this war? Who wants to be the magistrate and who wants to be Lysistrata?
At page 38,
Mm-hmm.
I can be the magistrate.
Awesome. Thanks, Apollo. Anyone want to be Lysistrata?
I will.
Awesome. Thanks, Vinny. So page 38, the magistrate says, how are you going to stop violent disturbances? And Lysistrata says, very easily, and the magistrate says, but how? Explain that. And now, Vinny, you go ahead and take over.
It's like a bunch of yarn when it's tangled. We take and pass it through the spindle back and forth. That's how we'll end the war. If people let us try by sending out ambassadors here and there, back and forth.
You're an idiot. Do you really think you can end such fearful acts with spindles, spools, and wool?
If you had any common sense, you'd deal with everything the way we do when we handle yarn.
What does that mean? Tell me.
First of all, just as we wash the wool in a rising tub to remove the dirt, you have to lay the city on a bed, beat out the rascals, and then drive away the thorns and break apart the groups of men who join together in their factions seeking public office, pluck out their heads, then into a common basket of goodwill, comb out the wool, the entire compound mix, include foreigners, guests, and allies, and anyone useful to the public good, bundle them together. As for those cities which are colonies of this land, by God, you must see that, as far as we're concerned, each is a separate skin. From all of them, take a piece of wool and bring it here. Roll them together into a single thing. Then you have made one mighty ball of wool, from which the public then we must have weave its clothes.
Okay, so what do you think of this metaphor that Lysistrata gives? Like running a nation or a city-state is the same as preparing some wool. What do you think? What strikes you about what she says here? What do you think?
I don't like there's
Go
more
ahead.
to it than what they think.
More to it than what they think, and also like women might be much better at it because they do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because magistrate is just like, all you do is this one simple task. And then Lysistrata is like, it's a lot more than that. It's like this, and this, which
And
is
we're
also
actually-
similar to when you do this, and this.
And we're actually better at balancing complicated tasks than you men are, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that really pops out at me is like she says like men are often like self-interested, right? So men gather together in their factions to try to like jockey for power, and so like men are all competitive, right? And this competition is actually hurting the nation state. And so what you need to do is you got to like lay out the nation state, and you got to actually take those men who are interested in power and take them out of power, right? Because they're only in it for their own self-interest. They're not going to help the nation. Really, she's like, this has got to be like a good, like, we can't have individual people out for themselves. We got to have like people who are interested in taking care of everyone. And so this is very, like, even still now, the idea is like men are all about individuals and women are all about taking care of others, right? Like, so men are about power and women are about nurturing. Again, kind of buying into the gender binary. And Lysistrata says, like, if you're going to have a good nation, you need to kind of reject all that jockeying for power, all of the selfishness and competition, and be more like women. So she says, you know, we need to break apart the groups of men, pluck out their heads, and then into a common basket of goodwill. So bring everyone together, comb out the wool, the entire compound mix. We've got to mix everyone together. And this includes foreigners, guests, and allies, and anyone useful to the public good. So basically, the people who are running the nation right now are all self-interested. And what we need to do is get rid of them and bring in people that care about everyone. And that can include women. And we're going to bundle them together. And then we're going to take our allies and weave them together and make one perfect ball of yarn. And so in a lot of ways, she's saying, like, actually, like, you think there's this division between public life and politics and war and the domestic or private life and spinning wool, and, you know, like, you think your, like, life is very important and it's totally separate from our private life, which is, like, stupid and, like, shallow and disregard, like, but she's actually saying, like, this is actually giving the better tools, right? And what you're doing is actually terrible. So the last thing I wanted to do today, I think that's it. That's all I had on your kind of thing, is that kind of show you some pictures of Lysistrata throughout, how Lysistrata has been represented, like, in art throughout history. Lysistrata. Because the other thing I wanted to tell you is, like, we haven't seen too many men other than the magistrate so far and some of the soldiers. But when the men do start to come, they're all supposed to be wearing these giant prosthetic phalluses. Do you guys know what a phallus is? Anyone?
No clue.
A phallus is a giant erect penis. And so, like, here's, like, so the Greeks would be running around with these giant penises strapped to themselves. And here's the women. But, like, so this is, like, a modern interpretation. But, like, the men are, like, it's like, yeah, it's very dirty, like, not just in the jokes, but also in everything else. So there's some of it. Let's see, Lysistrata. Again, right there. So this is one I was kind of thinking about. Hold on. So notice that Lysistrata is here standing next to a giant phallus, right? It's a giant erect penis. And phallus was by Freud and Lacan and Carl Jung and a whole bunch of others. Like, basically, phallus is kind of male symbol of male's own power. And Lysistrata is standing next to it, and she's kind of like, directing it. Yeah. And so there's some symbolism there, right? So with that, I'm going to I'm probably gonna let you kind of go and fill out the rest of that thing and submit it by the end of class. Or, like, you don't have to submit it until midnight, but I figure if you can take these, like, last 10 minutes and work on that thing. For next class, finish Lysistrata and Patty will be presenting. And this is, like, the unit about war and comedy. And so how does comedy kind of challenge views of war and warfare and fighting? Okay. Any questions for me? You do have an analytic response due this weekend, a soft deadline. You can write about Lysistrata. You can write about Macbeth. You can write about the stories we talked about last class. And the poetry we did a couple of classes ago. Okay. Cool. All right. So I'm gonna let you guys go. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Don't go crazy. Bye.
Thank you.
No problem. It was fun.